to Two Babies in a Business, a podcast about business, marketing, growth, strategy, staff, clients, babies, and marriage. I'm Christina. This is Peter. And we are the founders and leaders of CIPR Communications. And we are also married.
Hey, Christina.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good. So what are we talking about today?
Well, we just finished talking about budgeting for big projects. And now we're going to talk a little bit about budgeting for all of the other things, which is a giant can of worms.
Yeah, no kidding.
But what I will say is, in this kind of transition between big projects and tactics, is it's a really great way to, I'm going to say, date an agency or date a staff person. So when you're thinking about tackling a big strategy, I'm actually going to use Tours and Kamloops. One of our longtime clients is a great example. They hired an individual on a contract basis. So this was years ago, but they didn't have a marketing manager in place. Obviously, with a destination marketing organization, an important role. They brought an individual in as a contractor to do the big project of a marketing strategy. And that allowed that individual to get to know the team. It allowed that individual to really dive into past marketing from the organization and not. And it resulted in that person and individual being hired as the marketing director because it was a fit and it was great. And the organization was aligned on the direction she had recommended as a contractor to go. So an interesting way to kind of test the waters on a new hire is through a big project. And then similarly through a website or a tool or a strategy with an agency, you can bring that agency in to do kind of that piece of work. And again, see if that way of working, the personalities of the folks on the agency are a fit with your culture. And if I'm being honest, it's kind of how we like to date clients too. I think that typically if something like a strategic process goes really well, I'll talk about our friends at Métis Crossing. We originally engaged with them through actually a response, a RFP response, to which we were selected, did the entire strategic development over a quarter, and really got to know these folks. And I think from that kind of engagement with them, it became really clear our passions in the work. It became clear the kind of personality matches, and it's made kind of moving into a more traditional marketing retainer with them really seamless, because one, we've created the marketing strategy and the website, so we kind of understand that piece and what we're trying to achieve. But two, we've gotten to know the staff. And I think, in a marriage, if you can face the big stuff together, then obviously the little stuff is easier. So I would say the same thing with a hire or an agency is, if you can face the big stuff together and it becomes successful, chances are the execution piece ends up being really great as well with that.
Yeah. And so kind of with the topic of setting a budget for each marketing channel, then really it flows, or it should flow from that strategy process. And there should be a budgeting process in that strategy process. And I'll say a couple of things about this topic kind of at the top is that, I think often companies, think, oh, I need this and I need that. And, oh, my competitors are doing this and, oh, this and that. Right. And so they often sort of chase all these different tactics, and then they realize, oh, like it's really expensive to have all these tactics and all these channels going at the same time. So I think, again, if you start with that strategic process, align it with your business goals, then it allows you to kind of put it out over time, and sort of maybe think about, okay, what are the 3 tactics we can invest in right away to start to generate results? And then, once that's kind of working, what are the tactics we can add on over time to sort of, transform and transition your budget? So, that strategic process really allows you to hone in on the tactics that are going to make sense for your business. And then, you can set a sort of tactic by tactic budget. So, I mean, This is a bit of a tough topic to cover because, like Christina said, it's a big can of worms. But I always like to think about this in context of sort of short-term tactics and channels and
Mhm.
longer-term tactics and channels, right? And I mean, obviously, the longer-term tactics and channels include, for us, always things like content marketing, and content is one big long-term one that you should always have a budget for, ongoing, and search engine optimization. And content, um, so those are great. And then beyond that, it's sort of like, okay, what are your short-term tactics to get that content in front of as many people as possible? And so you might have social media as a channel, and various different types of social media platforms. You might have paid PPC, or paid search, or paid social media. You might have PR, or paid PR, that those types of things, or use of influencers, which you've talked about before. You might have an e-newsletter and just sort of direct communication with your clients, so there might be upselling and things like that you might be able to do. So those are just some examples of some channels. And really setting a budget for each channel comes down to your business goals. And I know we're kind of a broken record on this, but and it comes down to the research as well. So, I'm going to use pay-per-click as an example. And we've used this in previous podcasts as an example, but we had a client that came to us and said, my budget is $2,000. And I went and did the research and said, well, you're in an extremely competitive marketplace. Your cost per click is like $8. And you have, dozens and dozens of really big companies competing on all of these keywords. So I said, you're going to need to be thinking about more like a $4,000 or $5,000 budget to make a dent. And he said, no, this is my budget. And so, we sort of went ahead with him and went along with him for a while, and he didn't really get the conversions to the extent that he needed them to create an ROI. After a while, we finally convinced him. We got him to the budget that the data showed he needed to spend in order to basically get the numbers working for him, and it started to work. And so, I'm going to continue on with PPC quickly here, but the way I look at it is, if you think about a 2% conversion rate as a sort of a minimum kind of, or a low end, then, what does it take to get you a 2% conversion rate? And what does that mean for your business? So in my business, 2%, let's say 3,000 or 300 clicks a month on a PPC campaign, 2% conversion rate would be 6 conversions. And so if 300 clicks on my ad resulted in 6 leads, and I converted and I turned 2 of those leads into clients, that probably has a good ROI for us as an agency, right? But if you're selling like a $150 service, you're going to need a lot more than 6 leads to come in from that PPC campaign, right? So there's a long way of saying you need to follow kind of the data, and set your budget up based on the data. And there's just some hard costs that are just hard costs. And if I think about, putting a press release over a wire, that's just a cost. That's just a cost. And there's the cost.
Yeah.
If you think about an ad buy, that's the cost of, that's just the cost. And so, do your research on what these things cost, understand how they fit to your business goals, and then make the decisions accordingly as to where you're going to get your best bang for your buck.
Yeah, I think my advice too on this would be, look at the skill set you have in-house, and then look at the skill sets that you might need from an outer resource, whether that's an agency or a contractor or something different or new hire, and start to almost divvy the tactics up that way too. So if you have a really strong resource internally that's great at social media, has graphic design experience, and loves to write content, well, okay, get them plugged into that.
That's a full role of things.
That's a big role. That's a big job. Don't add anything else to that job description. But your strategy that you've just invested in will most likely have things that need to be done based on those. And then start to think about, okay, so SEO, and what do I want to spend there? And I think what most agencies and how they would approach this is, I guess there's 2 schools of thought. One, you can have kind of the agencies that are hyper specialized. So you would get your SEO guy, your PPC girl, your PR team, and potentially have a collective of all these agencies working together. And so there's some costs associated with those things. But then there's also this kind of agency retainer model or agency on record. So being able to kind of have a partnership with one agency where they offer you a suite of different services, and then are able to usually, I don't want to speak for everyone, but usually find some savings, and find better price points than kind of the a la carte style, to be able to kind of fit all the tactics in one. And so I think about our relationship with clients, and every month this is one of my jobs, the real glamorous parts, is a spreadsheet with a bunch of numbers where I can say to a client, okay, here's the 10 services you've hired us to do, whether it's content or SEO or PPC or web maintenance or social, all those things. And here's the amount of hours spent. And, if you were paying retail price, what those things would cost. Here's, what we've billed in terms of finding you some savings, and finding you kind of an all-encompassing rate, and, essentially the money you've saved by having an agency on record versus not. So again, you have to decide what's best for your business, but often if you have kind of the one relationship approach that's supplementing your team, there's some cost savings there. But if you have a team that's kind of set up and is more robust, maybe you just need an agency to do a one-off here and a one-off there. My biggest recommendation would be to shop around, but not shop around based on price.
Yes.
I think that often, especially when people are looking to save money, they go, oh, wow, this guy will do SEO for me for $100 a month. I'm still trying to figure out what people do for $100 a month and how they survive.
Yeah.
But shop around we've said this before, from like values. Does the agency or the individual have the same values that you do as the company? Yeah. Do they understand the strategic piece? Yes, I think price becomes important. But when you're looking at that spectrum of prices, if you have shopped around and done some interviewing, don't pick the guy that's the cheapest because they're the cheapest.
Right.
And don't pick the guy that's the most expensive because they're the most expensive either.
There's some thought of perceived value in there, right? Like really think about, yeah. And I'm going to throw some numbers out here just because people always like numbers. And, we talk about that sort of, I would say I would call it 5 to 15% of gross revenue towards marketing as a very broad range. But I'm going to throw this out there and suggest that it's really hard to accomplish anything from a marketing and communications perspective for less than $1,500 to $2,000 a month. Like a lot of companies try and they invest in things and probably don't really see many results. And I think the reason is because they underinvest. And like there's just some hard realities about things like the cost of advertising on Google or on social media is getting more expensive. And there's some myths out there that, social media is cheaper to advertise. Not if you're doing a really good job on targeting your audience. There are probably some similarities from an ad cost perspective. Public relations and sort of getting media attention is getting more and more, is gearing more and more towards like paid opportunities, because the media world is kind of really going through some hard times right now. I think we should do a whole podcast series on that. So there's just some really hard costs. And, when it comes to things like search engine optimization, like I'm going to suggest you need to be spending about $1,000 at an absolute minimum a month, because I hear a lot of people doing, I just do on-site SEO. And it's like, you're not even like content is the fuel of your SEO strategy. You need to have good content to make your SEO really work. And I hear of a lot of companies spending on just on-site SEO, which is sort of like one component of SEO. So, what I'm suggesting is that a lot of companies are trying to spend as little as possible, and they're probably under investing and therefore getting underperforming when it comes to marketing. And so if you're going to do that, then just don't do anything, in my opinion, because you're kind of just throwing money away. So, we really need to think about the appropriate budget to actually meet your business growth goals.
So would you say, and again, these are very arbitrary numbers, so my caveat would be like, hey, do a strategy, figure out what your competition's doing, look at your business goals. Yeah. But like if you're a small business, and I'm thinking small, like you probably don't have an internal marketing component. It's probably on the side of your desk. You're that business owner or operations manager. I think you need that kind of to think about marketing budget monthly from 1 to 5,000.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from 1 to 5,000, and realistically, probably a minimum spend of, probably $1,500.
Yeah.
And that would sort of allow you to pay some amount of money towards some actual ad buy.
Yeah.
And then probably sort of, yeah, I mean, depending on if you want to get into the PPC game, we as an agency, we won't even take anything. We won't even take a client unless there's a minimum ad spend of $2,750 a month Canadian. And we've just been there, done that. And, small campaigns just the economics just don't really work. Now that's not to say some people won't do smaller campaigns, but it sort of gets difficult with the cost per click and those types of things. So yeah, I mean, PR, I mean, I would say if you're going to get into the PR game, you're looking at a minimum of a $2,500 one-time investment, probably more, and probably $2,500 minimum per month type of thing if you're going to get into a monthly retainer on the PR side. So, I mean, yeah.
So that that small business, think about the number. And again, you've given some percentages based on revenue, but that kind of 1,500 to 5,000, I would say medium businesses just scaling up from there, right? You're probably at a 3 to 7.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you're a larger business, or I think caveat here, maybe not a larger business, but a business looking to invest in growth, I think now you're looking at a 5 to 10. Or
more. I mean, we have clients that spend $20,000 a month on just PPC ads alone. And it's also like, where are you at as a business from a growth perspective? Are you in a growth phase? Yeah. Well, then you need to spend more money. Like I'm sorry. Like I had a funny conversation with a guy yesterday, and it was just like, oh, I can't afford to do any marketing because there's no business coming in. And it's like, well, okay. Do you think there's maybe some correlation between those things? I do, but I'm not going to argue with you. It's like, all right, you're not my customer because you don't actually tell me that you believe that marketing will generate business. Otherwise, why would you invest in marketing if you don't think it's actually going to generate business for you? So I'm being a little bit sort of blunt on this topic because it's sort of one that frustrates me often. But this is an investment, and this is an investment in your growth. And again, if you're very clear on your business growth goals and you have a good strategy in place, you understand your KPIs, you understand how to measure ROI, then it makes this investment something that you can actually understand and then, feel comfortable investing in, which is important.
Totally. So I think great place to end. So if you have still sat through this series, I think we're on like episode 10 now. It's like, and you were still like, I don't know what the number is. There's some to start with from a monthly perspective. And remember that those big projects, you can't eat your monthly budget from those big projects. So keep those separate.
Budgets. Yeah. Well, if you like Two Babies in a Business, we'd really appreciate it if you like, comment, or share. That would really help us out. Thanks for listening.